Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marq Marquette. We're so glad you're with us to stay curious. We've got three guests here. My harebrained idea to have a little panel about why we preserve space history, and all three of these gentlemen are either involved in space history or the efforts to preserve it. And in the blue shirt is our great friend Bob Castro. Bob, you've been a friend of our museum for many, many years. It will tell you about Bob, what he does to save space history. In the middle, we have Adrian Harrison, who's a filmmaker on vacation, though.
Yes.
Adrian, good to have you here at our museum.
I'm pleased to be here.
Bob's been here many times. You haven't. What do you think of our humble little?
This is my first time, Mark, and I have to say that it's very impressive. Just the volume of memorabilia and just stuff is great. It's the just stuff bit, looking at some of those bolts around the corner that were keeping the vehicles on the ground, and you can't lift them.
Absolutely.
They are massive. They're great.
Well, Bob's from Atlanta, if you didn't pick up his accent, but Adrian's from London, and glad to have you here. And then finally, another Brit we have here who's become a good friend, Bruce Smith. Hi, Bruce. Bruce was here in September 2021 doing a program on Stay Curious about his role with Bendix and the ALSEP Apollo experiment we're going to talk about here. Bruce, great to see you. All three of you were here for our astronaut memorial yesterday. Bruce, how are you, and what did you think of that memorial?
Well, we came especially for it, and it turned out to be one of the more memorable occasions that we've experienced.
Outdoor voice, but yeah, there we go. Is that better, Marty? Yeah.
It was a very solemn and very beautiful occasion, and the mix of speeches and singing and recognitions was just right. And we especially noticed that, Mark, you conducted the ceremonies especially well, and it went really great. And I need to congratulate you on how well you did.
Well, thank you very much. It's my privilege and believe and honor I never thought would be on me in my life to be MC with Alterio. Was also involved with that. City of Titusville Flag and Memorial Committee and American Space Museum. And it is truly the honor every year for me to be involved with that. We posted pictures on Facebook today. It is on YouTube and Facebook, the entire service. We did have a hiccup, so YouTube has a break in it. But the whole thing's there, and our partners from Israel, it was just amazing what they shared about Ilan Ramon, the Israeli astronaut, the 20th anniversary of this tragedy. People are going out to Texas and Louisiana to observe that, where the recovery was. Nicole Stott's message was beautifully oriented towards the Israeli consulate that was here from Miami. They had a couple carloads, over 10 people came up from Miami, 3-hour drive to be at our 1 o'clock event yesterday. So you can see that on YouTube and Facebook. Please do. It's very heartfelt. And like I said, my honor to be part of that. And thank you, Bruce, for your compliments there. The whole thing smacked of history, of course. And as we talk about each of you here, let's just go introduce you in a way of your job. Here we want to mention Shuttle Fest. I can now focus on in our museum, April 15th, Saturday. We're going to get the lineup and everything out there for you all, but it's going to focus on the mobile launch platform number 2 and a documentary about that Mike Cotton has done. And we're going to bring a lot of people in on it for a day of celebrating the Shuttle Era and Shuttle Fest 2, bound to become a love fest for the shuttle workers around here that love to see each other. But first I'm going to introduce, and then we're going to talk a little bit about history, and then Bruce has got a personal story. But Bruce, this is a picture of you. You are right in the background there with that mop top.
Yes, indeed.
Lean forward there to the microphone for us.
We came to the United States in 1969, and I was appointed as the project engineer on the Apollo Lunar surface heat flow experiment. What you see here is me loading the probes into an antechamber in order to cool them down and measure temperature and absolute temperature to extremely high accuracies.
And you're standing up there in the back there, 53, 54 years ago, huh?
Right.
And how interesting, of course, the heat flow experiment was first on Apollo 15. Apollo 16, they had a problem. John Young tripped over the wires and
Right.
tore it up, and then it worked okay on 17.
It worked well.
Much to the story you're going to tell me. Was that 15 or 17?
That was 15.
Okay, 15 is the story where the first heat flow experiment almost didn't fly, and it's a very interesting story Bruce has. Documented in your Bendix journal there. He's authored a paper in this that you might find in there. Bendix, one of the kind of unsung companies of our Apollo era, that did a lot of electrical things in these experiments. Here is the heat flow experiment we're talking about on the moon. Quickly describe what that's all about, Bruce.
Certainly. That shows the entire ALSEP, Apollo Lunar Surface experiment package, with all the instruments deployed.
Mm-hmm.
And it has atmospheric experiments, it has a seismometer, and it has the heat flow instrument, among other things. But the heat flow, do you want me to say any more about the heat flow instrument?
Well, we'll get back to that when we're talking about the
okay.
problem with it and
that's
how
fine.
Bruce actually saved this experiment on Apollo 15, much to the risk of losing your job, kind of, in a way.
Yeah, I was almost fired.
Yeah, but that's the passion that the space workers had for everything. Marty Winkle, it's a good segue to say hi to you. He worked on the Grumman lunar module. He helped, I don't think he helped stow that in there, but what quad was that in? Quad 4?
ALSEP was in 3.
ALSEP was in quad 3, which is you're looking at the ladder where the guys came down. Quad 1's on the left, 2, so it'd be back corner, right-hand corner there. Marty, did you ever have anything to do with that?
Absolutely not.
They wouldn't let him even touch it with his gloved hands. Well, that gives me also an opportunity to thank Marty for an excellent job. Bruce, thank you for the compliment, but our team of Marty and Jessica Galloway broadcasting the event around the world went pretty flawless. The only hiccup was not our problem. The Wi-Fi burped for a minute there and kicked us off, but Marty, excellent job. He was behind the camera most of the time. Yeah, I haven't caught my breath to watch it all yet. So, but we understand that from our friends like Tom Usiak out there that they enjoyed watching it, and it was quite an event. We'll move on here to talk a little bit about Adrian, and I got a couple slides. Adrian, you're a filmmaker, documentary maker. Your work is on Vimeo? Is that
Vimeo,
it?
yes.
Vimeo.
Yeah. Is that?
All right.
Do you have Vimeo? Oh, you must have Vimeo over here. It's a platform for...
I'm not much of a video
Okay.
person. I still am a black and white photographer at heart, developing Tri-X films. So
Yeah. Vimeo is a video profile account that holds copies of my archive of my...
well, where do you live, and how did you get kind of involved in video making? You're here on a vacation,
Yeah.
kind of doing a little
Yeah.
research for a project, but
Yeah, I live in London. I've spent 30 years working in broadcast television in the UK. I've worked for all the major broadcasters, BBC, Sky Television, ITV, and various other production companies. So yeah, for over 30 years. In that time as a designer, but also more recently as a documentary filmmaker.
here's one of your documentary films here.
Yeah.
That looks very pretty there. The about a circus life.
That's as part of a photographic project as well, which sat off the back of one of the films I made about the art of fairground art. So this is the case in point here. You've got this is Carter's Steam Fair that tours the southeast of England. Beautiful hand painted fairground. Everything's hand painted. All the rides, all the trucks, all the living wagons,
Wow.
a whole lot, everything. And that brings me to my passion about filmmaking and stories as well. You know, it's about history, and you know they are painted skills that were really on their way out in the UK as in the States as well. And I like capturing stories. I like capturing stories about people, about things, about art and design. I'm a designer as well, so the passion for letters and for painting and for print, for art and music, and other things, and science and space as well. You know, I'm a child of the 60s. So, you know, one of my first memories is watching Apollo 11 land. I was only 4 years old.
Jeez.
But I can just remember that. I can just remember that. And my nana saved all the papers from that day.
How did she?
So
The London Times.
yeah,
and
the Times, I think the Daily Mirror and various other papers, the Standard, all the papers some papers aren't even there now.
Did she save some of those Mercy Beat magazines with the British invasion in it?
Yeah,
the
none
Beatles
of
and the
that.
Stones
It was space, and out of all the people, I mean,
Really?
I watched the moon landings with my grandparents,
Uh-huh.
and I had no idea she'd saved these papers.
And here's a guy that was part of the
Part
moon
of it,
landings with
yes.
Bendix there.
Absolutely. And that's where my interest came from as well. I had, you know, up until probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, I had no idea there was any Brits worked on Apollo. And in many respects, why would I know?
Yes.
So that story about Brits who worked on Apollo, you know, that's not taking anything away from anyone that worked on Apollo. Is a
You knew Bruce
fascinating story.
before. You came to the States here, right? Or
I've known Bruce for a few years now.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Good.
But it's, you know, the stories that and it's about stories again. That's what interests me. That's my passion about telling stories that you may not know about, you may not be aware of. You may be aware of a bigger picture, but hey, there's a story in there that you might not know.
But
And
stay
Bruce-
curious, because Bruce has got a great story to
And
share.
he's
with
got
us, yeah.
Bruce has plenty of
Yeah,
these
he does
stories.
have plenty
He's
of
got plenty of
stories.
stories. So it's people like Bruce, and it's people, you know, it's people like his colleagues that came over from the UK that has really sort of galvanised my interest in the Apollo story. You know, it's something that was so beyond my expectation of ever being in somewhere like this, ever knowing people that have worked in this industry. That it just galvanizes me day by day even more to tell these stories and get the stories out there. And the opportunity to be here and talk to you guys and meet all the guys here and your fantastic museum, it's just brilliant.
It's a fantastic museum because of where it's at. We're talking about being in the birthplace of America's space age, Brevard County. Our green screen behind us, right above your head there,
There we go.
Adrian, is the little triangle that sticks out on our coast. Yep, there you go. Bob's
Yeah,
pointing
that side,
to it.
yeah, that side.
And people from Europe, Scotland, hello there, Robert Law. We've got Cliff Watson watching in Australia. They've all been to this little point here, including you, Bob Castro, many, many times here. Isn't it interesting how one little point, and there's so few space centers in the world, but I think Cape Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force are more of a mecca than Johnson Space Center and Huntsville, though they're well thought of. But this is where humans leave the Earth. And Bob, what's been keeping you back here coming all these years?
Oh, this is 31 years that I've been coming down for the annual Apollo 1 memorial ceremony. I was a child of the 60s as well, growing up in Miami, right about down here. And I was following the missions on television with my space toys in front of the TV, following along with it. And it was the most thrilling, exciting time that I could have imagined. And then later on in college, when I started to meet some of the veterans, and I would thank them for saving my childhood, saving my future from the turmoil of the 60s. It was actually a pretty scary time to be a child growing up then, with all the political and violence and so on. When they would recount their personal histories, what was most memorable for them was the Apollo 1 fire, because it was such a tragedy and such a shock. It wasn't during a launch. It wasn't on launch day. It was an unfueled test. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous, and yet it was. So it's not about what I've done or any of the supporters of this, Mark Pinchel, the founder of the Apollo 1 Memorial Ceremony. It's about what Grissom, White, and Chaffee did. And so we owe it to them. If you think about it, I shouldn't have seen a landing on the moon. None of us should. It should have been Isaac Newton. It should have been Copernicus. It should have been Robert Goddard or Jules Verne. These are the people who, because of when they were born, had that imagination, and yet we were able to see that. So we kind of owe it to them, but also to the future, so that we don't end up with cultural amnesia, is to document and preserve these. Because I've come to find out that you can't just rely on professional historians, as wonderful and valuable as they are. Each of us carry shards of history with us, and those always are in the point of wrapping of personal stories. And if these stories are not recorded, not written down or recorded or told to someone else, they are self-extinguishing. And I sometimes feel like I have an eyedropper, and there's this vast lake of human knowledge that's evaporating, and I'm trying to save a little bit of it at a time.
Bob, well put. Your
Absolutely.
expertise is film, saving the precious films from 50 years ago. I first met you like 5 years ago, and Bob taught me. You open up that 16 millimeter tin can reel, and you get a whiff of ammonia coming out of there. You better get him to transfer that thing if you can pull it apart, because that's about ready to go kaput in there. And you've literally saved hundreds of from what, short videos to mission footage, correct?
Yes, not just space. The company I work for, we transfer chemical motion picture film for archives, government, industry, even feature
Give a
films.
plug to your company there.
It's called Cinepost.
Cinepost, Cinepost in Atlanta.
Cinepost in Atlanta, and we do rescue work. We basically do ICU work to try to save chemical motion picture film.
There you are.
Video,
We're showing
videotapes.
some of your production facilities there.
Videotapes and audio tapes from destruction. And what we do is we use broadcast equipment, the same kind that does feature films and does network shows, some of which we do. But we approach it with the same professionalism, even if it's someone's personal home movies, such as this family right here, who we use the same techniques to try to correct the color back to our forensic results indicate the film was when it was shot. Not the way it is now, because sometimes the film can change color or become brittle over time, but how it looked originally. And we're not always right, but we try to get that horseshoe as close to the pin as possible. And based on our customer feedback, we do pretty well.
So I'm seeing, is that a Nash in the background there or something like that? You got, yeah, so important. And you have done this a long time, and I was involved with the Ritz Camera Center that did a lot of digital restorations, and my God, it was so cost prohibitive at one point in time, and now it's not. It's it's gotten real reasonable over time there, as the equipment and so forth generates in there. Well, like these gentlemen, I've been a space geek all my life, and I saw my space history in Findlay, Ohio, south of Toledo, but just about 90 miles or about 60 miles south. I grew up about 60 miles north of where Neil Armstrong grew up, in Wapakoneta, Ohio. So watching the moon landing in high school at age 15, it was extra pride that a Buckeye was walking on the moon there. And though that museum wasn't founded yet, till later. But I tell people I lived 35 years in Upper East Tennessee, closer to Asheville than Knoxville, and a lot of Civil War stuff up there. And when I met this museum 5 years ago and just felt spiritually that I was going to be involved here, and M. It's been such a blessing in my life to meet people like this, share their story on this format. But we all share the love and the passion of space exploration, uh, preserving the what's going to be looked at as the primitive time of space exploration. These crude spaceships called Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, you know, and that's my joy, is helping facilitate some of these stories in throughout our community, and representing the museum as a community leader is an honor that I take very seriously, because everybody knows, like, these guys are so passionate about it. You know, I'm passionate about, but we need to preserve where it all started, and let's don't forget the people who bring it forward there. I was very humbled and honored when Bob Castro took me out to the Apollo 1 ceremony on 2018, Bob, that was on January 27th, and met Scott Grissom. And what a moving, emotional ceremony that is, with very few people privileged to be there, with the full moon rising that night over. And we all know that Gus Grissom probably would have been the commander of the first mission to the moon. Deke Slayton, who chose them, the crews, said that in his biography. But their memory is alive with things that the city does, with the memorial that we did yesterday. And what a treat it was to have Hugh Harris, who comes on our program once a month at 90 years old. We had him share the biographies of the Apollo 1 guys, and hope everybody enjoyed that. Hugh still has his chops at 90, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He was really good there. Yes, from space toys, you mentioned, sitting there playing with your space toys and building your models. Man, I remember building that Redstone rocket model and getting the black paint all over me, painting the capsule and the red the red escape tower. Great memories. Did you have memories like that? Let's talk to you just a second about your childhood space memories, or more on par with Marty's than mine, because you worked the Apollo era. Bruce?
Yeah. Well, I was especially fortunate, because at an early age I grew up with 3 half uncles who were interested in electronics and motorcycles and photography and all the rest of it.
Mm.
And it kind of sparked my interest in general in this stuff. But I think my main interest in space was what really came at about the time of Apollo 8. And watching it one Christmas, one of the relatives' houses up in Hull, and seeing the picture of the Earth taken from Apollo 8, I thought, whoa, this is really something. So I ended up working at Hawker Siddeley Dynamics on, I designed the safety and separation system for the Europa 1 satellite launcher. But I realized back then that the chances of Europe doing very much, I remember working with the French. That was the sticking point for me. I said, this is the point at which I disembark and go to the United States.
Okay. And that ended up good with you at Bendix there. What how do you look at the Apollo program in history 50 years later since the last time somebody walked? I mean, a half century later, no one's been back to the moon. But how you worked on it? How does that strike you today, Bruce?
Well, I think it might have been you describing the fact that you look back throughout history at the great events of history, the really memorable events of history going back thousands of years. And the Apollo program is way up there because it transcends so much. It's not just going into space, but the whole notion of mobilizing people to do these magnificent things with joy and with peace. And you take it and you say, how can this be? And you, I don't know, you go back to the Industrial Revolution in Britain, right? The whole development of steel and cutlery and then the steam engine and all this other stuff. And then you had Michael Faraday with all of his exotic work. And you look at that era and you say, that's a lot of inventive stuff, but it pales into significance when you think about the Apollo program. And the fact you go around the world and ask people what they think about the Apollo program, I don't think anyone has a negative comment.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take.
Beautiful. Yes, you mentioned the just the accomplishments in getting the human power together, and the technical skills they had to learn very quickly in the 9 years we developed the moon landing. Bob Seek, who launched, I think Bob launched 57 space shuttles as the launch director and worked for NASA all his career. Bob also helped develop all of the management side of it, the shuttle. He said it wasn't the hardware that was the big accomplishment of the shuttle era, but the management process, he said, was just as big as an accomplishment, because managing the shuttle was an incredibly, it was 10 times what managing the Apollo vehicle was, that had millions of parts. And because this shuttle was so complicated, not just the orbiter, but the fuel tank and the solid rocket boosters all had technology that had to be developed. But I've always found that interesting, that Bob doesn't diminish the accomplishments of our shuttle built in 30 years, our space station, but the management processes trickled down into all of the management in America. And one of the most famous things that come out of the Saturn V development was the barcode. And they came up with the barcode that's so familiar in everyday life to keep track of those millions of parts.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Well,
Yes.
stay curious there,
There you
Bruce. Been there, but I hope that's the truth. At least that's what I've heard.
Yeah.
A comment from you, Adrian, there about perspective of space history and Apollo and such.
I mean, so from a London perspective, from a UK perspective, for me, it's these stories have to be told. They have to be captured. And I think, we're 50 odd years on now from the moon landings, and we're 50 years on from the end of Apollo. That no one's getting any younger, and I'm very mindful of that fact. And I want to be capturing that information. I want to be capturing those stories because, as you mentioned earlier on, Bob, they're going, and it's like having a handful of sand. It's running through your fingers. And it will be empty at some point. And I would like to get as much information and as many stories and capture that, because I don't think really looking forward people will really believe what happened if we're not careful. I mean, we look around here and you're full of hardware and whatever, but the hundreds of thousands of people that worked on it, there's less and less every year, as we know.
Oh, absolutely.
And at every level, and everybody has to do their job. The astronauts are at the sharp pointy end, but there's a big team that's supporting that sharp pointy end. And they're the stories as well. They're the stories I want to capture as well, because everybody's role was important. And it's vital that we keep that. And that's so my approach to that in this context is about space, but I look at that in the films I make about printmaking and about design and about other historical stuff. The sign painting stuff I do as well. Sign painting was an art that was in the UK was dead. It was gone. It was replaced by vinyl. That was it. We were all over. And now it isn't. in the last 6 years, the proliferation and the interest in hand-painted and handcrafted signs has increased tenfold in the UK. And I think we're better for it.
I look forward to watching your documentary.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
sounds interesting
I have
there.
a couple of documentaries about sign painting and sign writing with some great American guys.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great American sign painter, Marq Marty,
Okay.
who lives where I forget where he lives now. He's just moved. It'll come to me, but I'll have to tell you about
Sure.
it. But check out Marq Marty's work. Mike and I have gone off and done a few little talks about films and stuff in London and about the art. He's a great advocate of painted letters and the painted and brush art.
Bruce, you had a comment?
Just one quick one. What occurred to me is that the Apollo, from a strictly personal level, the Apollo program made me very proud of humanity. Might sound grandiose, but it's true. That's all.
Oh, that's beautiful. No, and proud to be a human part of that humanity that did it. Bob, we're so pleased that you're with us today. We've got a little round table here with these gentlemen that I've met two of them before. We had Bruce Smith was on a September 2021 Stay Curious, where he's going to talk a little bit about the ALSEP experiment there here at the end, something you'll be fascinated to know about. I've just met Adrian Harrison there, who's a filmmaker and documentary maker, and came here to enjoy our astronaut memorial. And then Bob Castro's been a great friend of our museum for many years. He works for an outfit that restores pictures, movies, film and stuff in Atlanta, and he's helped our museum restore some valuable footage there. But Bob Castro, you also, like Adrian were talking about, preserving the stories of these old generation of people. Okay, Marty's one of the youngest of the Apollo guys. He really is, because he's still in his 70s, but most of them are pushing in their 80s. And Bob, people like Ike Ridgel, Don Arabian, Charlie Mars, John Tribe, you have had these are A-listers of our space program in the management side. You've had the privilege of preserving their memories.
Yeah, we're at a decision.
I can't leave Johnny Johnson out of it.
Johnny Johnson, yes, who basically put myself and Mark Pinchel allowed the meeting to take place, which
just
is
three
to
or four
realize.
names of dozens that you've interviewed.
That's right.
Preserve their memories. Tell us about that process and how you enjoy doing that.
Well, we are at a decision point because we are now leaving the era of the original steps into space. It used to be that it was nations, first the Soviet Union, then the United States, and then others that could go. And now we're entering the realm where private companies are starting to make presences known in space. So we have the opportunity, the last opportunity, to provide context for whatever it is that they're going to go forward and do. I think that 500 or 1,000 years from now, people could look back at this era and consider that taking the first steps off of the Earth and out into space could be one of the most important things that the human race ever did. This is our last chance to speak to the men and women who designed, built, and operated the structures and the vehicles that made that happen, as well as from an artistic perspective, is talking to the people such as ourselves who were influenced by that. And it really set the trajectory of our lives, because otherwise there will be a kind of a cultural amnesia.
Yeah.
And we cannot allow history to become myth and legend.
Yeah.
We may fail at this, but we're going to go down fighting.
Yeah. Did you ever think, Bob, when you were a child, that you'd ever find yourself in this position now? That you were, A, talking about it, B, have worked with all these people, worked with all this footage.
It's a dream come true to have met the people that you spoke of, plus
We met
many
some
others,
Mike Ridgel
and Sam Bedingfield
Yeah.
and so on, the people who really did it. Dream come true. I mean, for some people, it's movie stars or athletes, and that's fine. But for me, it's the people who really did the activities which we now take for granted. We all receive information from satellites via GPS and telecommunications. We all deal with the product of what space presence can have, and we're all under the protection of weather satellites, because no longer will cyclones, hurricanes brew unknown out at sea and to come roaring in and destroy communities. So just from the perspective of weather satellites alone, I think you can justify the entire space program. Yeah. And of course, none of us will forget the Hubble Space Telescope and its views of the heavens, and now the James Webb Telescope. It's literally helping make our universe bigger and in some ways better.
Well put, Bob. The more we learn about our universe and our space environment, the more questions there are and the more things there are. I'm an astronomy nut, and there are brown dwarf stars that we can't see that number more than, that's the most common star out there. And things like that are fun to understand. But what Bob Castro's talking about is the urban legends that spring up through sports, entertainment, and space. And Quest magazine is a quarterly that you might be familiar with and does a great job of debunking some urban mess, including there was a picture of the Mercury astronauts taken in, let's say, May 1960, and they were supposedly saw an Atlas rocket blow up in front of their eyes. Well, with some detective work, they didn't see that rocket launch. Okay, that picture was taken at another date and time and this sort of thing. And those are the fun little investigative journalism or whatever you want to call it that I know you've done, to go down a few rabbit paths to prove something right or wrong. Can you think of anything off the top of your head, Bob?
Well, we can argue and maybe should do about the analysis and which trajectory we should go on and why and how it should be funded and all of those things. But we should have a common pool of verified information to be able to do that analysis from. And so contaminating the historical record with things, even if we want it to be that way, it's like, no, it really shouldn't be. Because once that trajectory starts to go off even a fraction of a degree, once, as you've seen from space travel, once you go several million kilometers, you're now going to miss a planet that way. You must keep the historical record verifiable.
Yeah.
And I know that when people are involved, there's all kinds of motivations and all kinds of desires there, but we really do need to keep the primary source material readily available, so that it's not just a regurgitation from other sources which may inadvertently or intentionally have altered it.
That's true. Yeah.
I'm looking around my library here in our Stay Curious studio, a couple of seminal books, but there's plenty of books by great writers out there that provide the bedrock 30 years ago, and it's 50 years since the Apollo program. And sometimes people keep wanting to rewrite the history and stop. It's just already been written by some great friends like Chalk and people like that out
And
there.
don't forget Charles Murray and Catherine Bly Cox.
There you
Apollo Race to the Moon. That's the number one. And that's not my words. That's Gene Kranz, the famous flight director.
The number one book to read is?
Yes, Apollo Race to the Moon by Charles Murray and Catherine Bly Cox. If you
Okay.
read that, you will know 80% of what you need to know about the human aspects of space, and particularly the moon program. It's an excellent piece. And on my copy, that's when I take them to these interviews and I have the people autograph the pages that they're on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Not because I'm an autographed hound, but
Yeah.
because I'm in their presence and I'm just saying, thank you for doing that.
Well, space history is something, and I've talked on Stay Curious that I wrote a weekly column on space and astronomy in a newspaper for 22 years. I did not miss a week in 22 years of writing a weekly column called The Stargazer. And when I moved down here 5 years ago, talking to Bob and Bruce and Marty and all these wonderful people at the American Space Museum or space workers, the knowledge I've gotten now, Bob, I say that if I have a gallon of knowledge right now of America's space program. When I moved here 5 years ago, after writing 22 years of columns, I knew a shot glass full when I came down here, and now I know about a gallon's worth. And am I correct talking to these people as far as the book learning, and talking to Marty and Bruce? World of difference, right, Bob?
There was a man named Charles Bell who had supposedly a large, or perhaps the largest, private collection of space hardware. He had worked and was able to get things in consignment and surplus. And he had a couple of sites in and around this area. He had wanted to found a space museum, but he passed before he could do that. I got to speak to him by telephone one time, and I thought in my mind, it's like, I need to do a documentary about him called Saving Space, because the stuff was literally going to be melted down and turned into aluminum siding or beer cans or something else, and he was able to preserve it, at least for a while. When he passed, unfortunately, it was auctioned off. But he told me that it was worth doing, because it was worth taking the risking human lives to go places which they didn't know could sustain that. They didn't know that this could work, but they went ahead anyway. And that kind of bravery just needs to be acknowledged and needs to be saved. And that was a great push for me to say, well, okay, now I'm going to do that. And when I got the auction notice after his death, I moped around for a week, and finally my wife said, "You need to go down there, because I don't want to, hear you moping anymore. Just don't buy anything that won't fit down the driveway." So I bought a helmet. It fit well.
Yeah, that's a good buy. Thank you for sharing that, Bob. We're going to hear from Bruce Smith, an amazing story here in just a minute. Stay curious, but I want to ask Adrian to chime in again about what you're thinking about during our little panel discussion here.
I mean, I'm looking around at everyone in this room and thinking, that the talent and the knowledge is quite superior. I mean, you touched on it there with your small amount of knowledge that you had when you arrived here, and it's obviously getting bigger. My knowledge of Apollo, I think, is quite good, but again, I feel completely overwhelmed by what I've seen the last 2 days. Being lucky enough to be at the memorial service yesterday, as well, and seeing all the things you've got around it, and the people that we've meet, the chance I've had to meet people, and just spend a few minutes just talking to people about their time on the program. Even Nicole yesterday, Nicole Stott at the ceremony was a wonderful chance to have 5-10 minutes chatting with her, because these are all stories that form a massive jigsaw. This is basically from a person and from a technical perspective, it's just an enormous jigsaw that came together, and it worked at the right time.
And it takes every piece of the puzzle. You put a jigsaw together, and you're down to those last few pieces. And hey, we're missing a piece. You can't put. It's like well put.
Every point.
Adrian.
At every point, you look outside here. You're looking at umbilicals. You're looking at all the bits and pieces that are needed.
Manuals.
And manuals and books and it's just overwhelming, because where do you start? Bruce has got all these manuals still of things and documents and documentation, but someone's got to start somewhere. And it's again amazing that after all this time, these documents and these things are still in existence. I know it's easy, some people think if you work in that industry, well, of course it's obvious it will be, but with a slightly outside view from London, and from being the other side of the pond, to come here and find stuff makes it to England. Of course it does. It makes it all around the world. But to see such a great collection of things here, that people are preserving this, and they are encouraging people to understand what happened in the 60s and the early 70s, particularly on Apollo, and all the previous flights as well, of course. I just, that has to be captured, and it's really important to do that, whether that's with photographs, whether that's with film or video or whatever,
or all of the above.
And all of the above. Absolutely. And to this day, there's still, the high-speed cameras that are being used on the launch systems now, and they were high-speed film cameras back in those days as well, which were, the technology involved in that, from a filmmaker's perspective, I've shot quite a lot of stuff on film as well, but the technology of high-speed film camera work, that in itself is a real art.
Yeah.
Something that we take for granted now, with some of the high-speed digital solid-state cameras that can just record and off they go. Timing your launches with the film speeds, with the exposures.
Right.
You've got an exposure that goes from, well, it's wider than this room, really, to control, to expose the launch correctly. That's a skill in its own right. Recording these things in its own right. It's not just flying the missions, it's recording the missions and how it's going to be recorded as well, which is where you come in again in terms of what you're restoring and bringing back. Because, in the photography side, I've recently, the new book that's come out, Remastering Apollo, which is the book that's just come out the end of last year. Those, the photographs and what they've done in that book about rescanning and multi-layering the imagery is quite incredible. Films that and exposures that were way off, and negs that were overexposed or underexposed. I mean, the great example of that is the picture on the cover, where you have McDivitt looking out of the capsule. The negative for that is just exposed for the white area of the light. They've now pulled the whole thing back, and you've got the whole. It's such a great image. It's so evocative of the time and the period, and the fact you can do that now with modern technology, and you've got that range on your negs to be able to do that. Is brilliant. That's taking modern technology, but pulling out of things that you didn't have back in the 60s and the 70s.
In that book, and I got to see it at in London, was not only good science and technology to do that, but it's also wonderful art.
Yes, it is.
Really
absolutely.
is.
Did you go to the exhibition at the
Royal Albert Hall? Yes, we did. Yes.
Yep, I was there as well.
We bought the ticket specifically so we could go.
Yeah,
in the Royal Albert Hall, Bruce.
Yeah.
Have you?
So
and me neither. I feel left out.
That book launch, that exhibition, was in the Royal Albert Hall. A very
cool,
organic and very beautiful place. It was in the round. So it was a great way to view an exhibition, wasn't it? It was a very different way to experience that as well.
Yes.
But from a technical and from a historical and from a restorative approach, that's recording history in a new way. That you were seeing more in the depth of those negs that you'd seen for some time. It's brilliant. I think that was an instant Christmas present. It was straight under the Christmas present list. So yeah.
Yes, Marty. We're who else is watching us today here? We got some good comments there. I want to take you a picture of us here too. We got Doug Forrest is watching in Los Angeles. He's a talented pencil artist. Ophelia is watching in Normandy, France. All right, We've got William Whiting. I think you're still in town, William. I'll give you a call. Dave Stange, one of our #1 fans up in Michigan. Tom Usiak is he and his brother Mark and a crew photographed over 70 shuttle launches.
Wow.
Cliff Watson, thank you for spending 400 stars, Cliff. That's about $14, I think he told us, contributing to our Stay Curious. He's in Pomona, Australia. Robert Law's up in Dundee, Scotland. Hey, Robert, watching on his gigantic
Good.
TV up there. You been in Dundee?
I haven't. But I was in Glasgow a couple of years ago.
Okay. Cynthia Rossi, saw you, Cynthia, at our memorial event. Thanks for attending. Steve Hammer, Gary Gerald. Gary Gerald probably got off his tractor plowing his peanut fields in Georgia there. And keep it up, Gary. Make mine Peter Pan, please. Smooth. Carlton Bailey's watching, and thank you for sharing your photos with us, Carlton. You can see on Facebook there's over 50 photos of our event yesterday. Bruno Lacondon and Daniel de Jong. Daniel de Jong is I think in Netherlands, visiting his family. He's an airline pilot here in America. So these are the kind of people around the world that watch Stay Curious. And we hope that you've enjoyed this little roundtable talking about space history. We'll end with a comment from each of us. We know it's a long program, but that's great. These are three friends of our museum that bring a great different perspective to us. But what you're going to hear now is Bruce Smith tell us about he worked with this.
Right.
He worked with that, and that is three of those are on the moon, and that's the part of the Apollo Lunar Science Experiment Package known as ALSEP. All right, and we will. I'll turn it over to Bruce here to explain how he tried to save. Well, he did save this experiment on Apollo 15, the first time it was taken to the moon, at almost the expense of losing his job.
Right.
In there. So I'll show that picture of Charlie Duke. What's
Right.
Charlie doing there? And warm us up there with your little
Well,
story.
Charlie Duke is inserting the heat flow probes into the stems just to try it out.
And there's John.
And there they are looking at the astromate connector to see how to connect it to the station.
There's the
There's the
heat flow
complete
experiment.
package. So I need to, at this point, just explain a couple of things.
Sure.
Put the story in context. You see here the two sets of probes, and those were inserted 10 foot deep in the moon, having drilled with a rotary percussion drill.
Those black things were set
Yeah.
10 feet deep. All right.
And, they're inserted in the moon. And the electronic box is a very sophisticated controller. And it consisted of 5 electronic boards with 12 layers each.
I'm gonna go to that picture,
Oh, that's the LSET package.
and I'm gonna go to
Right.
this picture.
Well, okay,
That help you?
I'll get there soon.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So you need to understand that there's an awful lot of circuitry, and you're dealing with, traces 0.04 inches. But we found one day that there were. Oh, and by the way, in order to connect between the layers, you had to have plated through holes, which is a black art if ever there was one. So you have copper through all of these layers, providing connections between the layers. Well, we found that we had 7 plated through holes were not working. And it was a serious issue. And we looked at what the normal processes were for fixing things like this, the fact we didn't have a spare in hand, and decided that, if we reported it to NASA, we would have heat flow taken off Apollo 15.
Oh.
So, the processes that we go through in doing this space stuff with all our white clothes on and goggles and God knows what else, with a whole bevy of inspectors and reliability people and every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the place watching every move. And I said, everybody out of the room. And I decided to fix it myself. Now, this is a very risky proposition. First, you have to work out where you could pick up traces to bypass the holes. If you got that wrong, you're in trouble, right? And then I had these incredibly thin insulated wires that I had to solder in place and then glue down on the boards. Very complex business. And if you did want to bring up that other thing just for a second, yeah, that one. Okay, that's just one board. But as part of this set, there were these handwritten details There you are. This is me.
Those are your handwritten
There's my
details.
writing, right?
What date does that say, Marty?
This was 1971, right?
It's like July
And
226. Or
But in any event, I had to take it upon myself to kick out the technicians, kick out all of the inspectors, kick out everybody, and fix it myself. So the big problem was that when I finished it, I asked the inspectors to inspect it, and they said, well, it looks good, you know, and then the other people came in and said it looks good. But the next thing I knew was a call from NASA saying, get your ass down to Houston.
and you were where?
In Ann Arbor,
Oh, okay.
right?
Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Yeah.
Bendix.
Get your ass down to Houston. So I traveled overnight. I turned up at the Space Center, and they had the most august forum of managers and scientists of NASA, probably 45 or 50 of them in this room. Well, to say that I was terrified is a gross understatement. And when I got up in front of the screen to explain what I'd done, I actually couldn't speak. It was really horrendous. I was overwhelmed with fear. And eventually, I cleared my voice, and I think Jim Lovell helped me a bit.
Is that right?
Yeah. And he said, you know, just take it easy, you'll be okay. So I went through everything. I described everything. They said, why did you do this? You've broken all the rules. And I said, well, if I hadn't done it, there wouldn't be any prospect of it going on Apollo 15. And now I have done it. There's still a prospect that you guys are going to disallow it. And when I get back to Bendix, I will be fired. And they said, okay, we'll approve it this time, and just don't do anything like it ever again. And then it flew on Apollo 15. Now that's very tricky work that I did.
Yeah, he had a bunch of this is your actual schematics and amazing, absolutely. Soldering and stuff like that.
Yeah, very
yeah.
fine soldering without
Yeah.
screwing up anything, and making sure it was all bonded in place. I was actually pretty good at this stuff.
Did it take you an hour, 2 hours, and you kicked everybody out?
Yeah, it took me 2 or 3 hours.
Uh-huh.
But
I can't believe they let you do that. Did you lock the door and you're all beating on the door saying,
I
listen?
kicked them out. I said, I'm the project engineer, get out. And they
It's
did.
still up there. It's
Marty,
still
have you heard a
there.
story like that flying? I don't think that was the Grumman way.
No, I haven't heard that before.
Yeah. Marty, you've that's a great story there. And Marty walked around that Quad 3 many times where that was tucked in there with your work. And this is the star-crossed beauty of the American Space Museum is here you two gentlemen have met, and you had something on what would that have been? LM9, Marty? LM9 is 15, I think. Yeah, it's LM9 is yeah, that's 15. No, that's a KSC. It ended up being 10. Yeah, LM10 was the module, the tail numbers of the lunar module there.
Well,
But that's neat that you two guys had. I mean, you were within, right beside his experiment there. You may have seen it on the gurney with the guys putting it in. Trying to get Marty to talk here.
Yeah, when you crawl into the slot to access anything on the lunar module, you're entering just to the right of Quad 3. So
Yeah,
I've been there.
that's neat. That's neat. What a great story I know that you've enjoyed, and I hope you've enjoyed meeting these three gentlemen, Bruce Smith, Adrian Harrison there, and Bob Castro. We hope to see you again, Adrian, in our museum here next
Thank
trip.
you. I would love to come back. It's
Studio.
There you are. There we
there
are.
we go. Is that better? It's
Yep.
somewhere. It's somewhere that I've wanted to come to for some time. I follow you guys online and your podcasts, and Stay Curious back in London.
We appreciate that a lot.
And now I'm here. Say hello. And I think it's I'm only here for a week. There's a lot of space things to get my head round this week. Heading down to the Cape later on this week as well.
The Cape, you mean?
Yeah, to the Space Center.
Oh, good.
Yep, heading
Good.
down
Well,
there.
there's a great astronaut, Tom Jones, is talking this week.
Okay.
We're going to
yeah.
go out and see him Wednesday, I think, is when I'm going to go out there and try
Yeah.
to catch him.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
he's,
Wednesday was possibly one of the days we were due to go down.
the astronaut encounter, they always
yeah.
have an astronaut of the day.
Yeah.
And
It's been 20. Well, I was over 21 years since I've been in the States.
oh, wow.
So I was here. Last time I was here was just after 9/11, actually.
My.
And that was the last time I was at the Space Center. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how it's changed over the last 20 odd years.
Yeah.
And I come back with a greater knowledge. I come back with a greater experience. I come back with a rounder understanding of the Apollo program from meeting everybody, from meeting Marty as well today. These are all influences that tell the stories that contribute to the stories I want to tell. And as I say, 20 odd years later, I never thought I'd be in this position now, having met these guys and you guys, and it's a great honor and a great privilege to be over here.
Yeah, I certainly do agree with you, Adrian. I feel the same way. Bruce?
I have a serious comment. You've all been talking about preserving the history of space. But the one thing that we haven't properly acknowledged yet is the foremost practitioner of this is sitting right here. He does more than anyone I know to preserve the history of space, and he's got videos to prove it.
Yeah, like 740 some episodes. But thank you very much. I appreciate that, Bruce. It's we have a team here, and the fact that our executive director, Karan Conklin, has pretty much given me free reign to do and mold this the way we wanted to, Marty and I being the we. And for me, it's all about the torch is passed, the Apollo era. It really has. We're scrambling to 4 moonwalkers left. Buzz just turned 93 years old. 4 out of 12 moonwalkers left. So for us, the future is the shuttle era and the shuttle astronauts. There were 350 of them around the world doing good things every day to promote space and educate the next generation. And that's what we're all about here. And I do appreciate your comment there, because we try hard to provide a forum on Stay Curious like none other to do this occasionally. So we love celebrating astronaut birthdays. Who else does that? And pull out some obscure space things once in a while out of the history books. So I appreciate that comment. Hope you've all enjoyed being with us here on Stay Curious. Any parting thought from you, Bob Castro?
Saving space is worth it, and we may not see the results of it, but future generations may look back and acknowledge us the way we look back and acknowledge Verne and Wells and Goddard and Newton and so on. So let's give it a try.
That's right. We all would like to be like 100 years from now. People are looking at our museum and the artifacts here like we're looking at Civil War items now that are 160 years old. Because a lot of we have over items in here that are pushing 70 years old that are part of the space age. So, yes, Bob, one other comment, Bruce?
Only thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. All of you here.
Thank you,
Nice
Mark.
to meet you,
Nice to
Adrian.
meet you.
Like a good friends. Bob, one of the first friends I made here. Always great to see you. I'm from Atlanta. And Marty, excellent job on Streamlabs. Thank you all for your comments today. And we've got some space history tomorrow we're going to preserve with Mikey Haddad, who is a manager of the space cargo going in. He's got a book over here about where have I got Mikey's book over there? Almost grab Mikey's book. He's done a book on payloads, and we're going to talk about some payloads of the month of January on the last day of January. So you'll want to come back for that. So again, thank you, gentlemen, for this impromptu little talk. I think it went great. Marty, again, thank you for all you did yesterday, and our Trekkie Techie Jessica to show our beautiful memorial to the rest of the world. And I'm Marq Marquette, and I will see you again tomorrow with payloads of our shuttle in the month of January with Mikey Haddad, all to bridge the space between us.